Well, yeah. Well, TJ English, obviously he's Irish, and he moved to New York City like in the 80s. He was a cab driver, and kind of that's what made him want to start writing about organized crime, especially the Westies was kind of living in Hell's Kitchen like during the time when they were really, on the rise.
I didn't realize that.
And and kind of this Havana Nocturne is like a bit different than his other books. Different and the same, of where TJ English, a lot of his books are about ethnicities coming together and trying to rise up via organized crime, and how like maybe some people had like legit motives when it came to that's what they actually wanted, but for the most part it was just kind of an excuse to justify the bad things that they were doing.
Well, he also talks about we watched a podcast that he did with Joey Diaz and Joe Rogan, which he says that he's come to think of organized crime as sort of the American entryway into life, where, in other words, a culture before they're fully assimilated, that's kind of how they'll make their mark, or kind of carve out some path for themselves. He says that
before
they're recognized as fully Americans.
I think that's very. That's why I say that theme is not very present in Havana Nocturne. Havana Nocturne is more about just like Havana in the 50s and how the mafia kind of took it over. In the Westies, it's very present. And the Corporation, which is almost like the sequel to this book, is very much about that. And in the most recent one, it's not the most recent book of his that I read, Born to Kill, about the Vietnamese gangsters.
I didn't realize TJ English wrote that too.
Yes, TJ English wrote Born to Kill, and that kind of theme of using organized crime to rise up the ranks is probably most present in that book, Born to Kill, but also that of kind of how hypocritical that idea also is, because if you look at the Irish in Hell's Kitchen, especially in the early days, or like the early days of the mob back when it was like the Black Hand extortions, all of their victims were other Irish or Italian immigrants. And in Born to Kill, they said that this Vietnamese gang had a rule: you only steal from other Asians, specifically other Asians that just arrived in this country, because a lot of them don't speak the language. They don't understand that you can call the police. They might be afraid to call the police. And that's why this idea of maybe some gangsters believed it. Maybe Lucky Luciano actually believed that he was helping Italians as a whole. But for the most part, they preyed on their own ethnicity, these gangsters. The early days of the mafia, the Black Hand specifically, where it was like, if you were a successful Italian, they were coming after you. It wasn't, we're all in this together, we're trying to rise up. It's just like, oh, you have money, I'm taking it. Especially if like, the late 1800s or early 1900s, when a lot of Irish or Italian immigrants were kind of afraid of the police. Yeah, and they weren't. They're the people that you're going to rob because they're not going to go to the cops. Mm-hmm. And it's just interesting of just like the way.
That's also the argument of why, this is kind of a weird segue, but why the reason a lot of serial killers go after sex workers,
because they don't go to the police.
Yeah, or why it's good to rob drug dealers,
because they don't.
People talk about mafia. People talk about,
and that's also you see it today with Long Island with MS-13. The number one people who MS-13 robs are they're El Salvadorian, recently came into this country, maybe here illegally, who cannot go to the police.
Yeah, I can't think of any instance. I'm sure there is one, so whatever, but I'm just saying I can't think of any instance in recent years, because that's been kind of the talk on the island, like it's kind of died down the last like year or two, but for a while, like the last like maybe 5 years, MS-13 specifically with a couple of like really gruesome murders.
Yes.
Specifically those 2 young girls in Brentwood, which
Yes.
is an area around here. But the point being, like, yeah, they're against, you know,
I'm sure that there are some
people in their neighborhood.
I'm sure that there are a lot of MS-13 members who believe that they're doing this out of, you know, El Salvadorian pride or try to justify it to
they
themselves.
extort the shit out of their own community.
It was the exact same thing that the mob was doing 100 years ago. That the Black Hand Mafia or like the early days of the Irish or the Jewish mobs were doing exactly then.
MS-13 shakes down local businesses in Brentwood and Central Islip.
Yeah, it's
which is like, you know,
it's exactly what the mob was doing. Yeah. And we'll bring this up because, you know, this book kind of starts in the
and then a guy like Trump uses that in a racist way to kind of scare all these white people.
You know what? That's the terrible thing about it is that now this group MS-13,
and it works, by the way.
This group MS-13 terrorizes El Salvadorian and immigrants who may not be here legally in their community. I don't think that it's terrible no matter what. You shouldn't be terrorizing people. But then somebody like Trump or just white supremacists on Long Island then use MS-13 to terrorize these people even more.
Right, because they're putting into, you know, their electorate essentially. Yes. Because it's not like they give a shit about these neighborhoods.
They don't. But you know what? If you watch all in it, I mean, look at the MS-13 murders on Long Island. We're going to get to the book eventually. The MS-13 murders on Long Island. Which were the ones who got the most media attention? The ones where the bodies were dropped off in Massapequa. Wouldn't you say?
Well, yeah, I see where you're going. I mean, they're using
this of like.
Well, no, because the one that Trump used specifically, literally put it in his 2016 campaign, was the mother of those 2 girls. I can't remember their names right now, but they were killed in like one was left on the street in Brentwood, and one was in like a wooden area behind a school or something like that. But you know, he took that and ran with it, and that's why it was like those girls' mother, who also ended up being murdered. You know, she aligned with Trump and Peter King, who's like a Republican who's now retired, but you know, and it was just like they're using your situation.
But also, all right. Well, what I was saying was you remember when they found the bodies in Massapequa?
There was a few,
There was a few, and politicians use that to say like these gangs are coming into the white neighborhoods to basically try to scare the white people to get elected, so that they can further terrorize these neighborhoods. The politicians who are now doing it in a different way. They're doing it through the system legally. But if you look at...
It's also just to stay in power. Yeah. Because, you know, people have this idea that Republican and law enforcement go hand in hand, which they do go hand in hand because they look out for each other. But it's not making anyone safer. Right. They're just using the scare tactic to try to remain in power. If
you look at 100 years ago, politicians were doing the exact same thing with the early stage of La Cosa Nostra, or the Black Hand, where they would use these groups who were the Irish or the Italian or the Jewish mobs, who were majority terrorizing Irish, Italians, and Jewish people, and use them to further make laws to oppress the recent immigrant groups. You know, if you look at New Orleans, which New Orleans was the first American city to have a La Cosa Nostra. I might get the details wrong. But
I didn't know that.
Yeah, but basically...
Before New York?
Before New York, yes. The first mafia family was created in La Cosa Nostra. I don't know the name of was created in New Orleans. The first American mafia.
That's news to me.
But when it came out that this mafia family, which was seen as like these psychopath Italians who are going to go into white neighborhoods and kill everybody, I don't know if they like basically burnt down the Italian section of town, trying to protect them. When really it was like the main victims of the mafia were other Italians.
Well, a couple of parallels. One is with the war on terror.
Yeah.
Just like, these terrorist attacks happen, so we have to sign away your rights with this Patriot Act because we're going to protect you. It's essentially, it's a scare tactic, but the motive behind it is not what's being sold.
Yeah.